What if I told you that gladiatorial games came from a place of ritual? Or that the games were actually pretty different from the way we portray them in movies and television? Would you believe me? Welcome back to the Hive, my fellow bumblebees. It is I, Amanda. Normally you can find me over on Top 10 Nerd Talk and Comics, but today I have returned to Bumblebee to tell you all about the top 10 messed up things about the life of gladiators. But in which way are these things messed up? Stay tuned to find out. And let me know which Roman emperor you find the most interesting and which you find the most dull in the comments below. I personally love Augustus, a traditional pick, I know, and I had to write a paper on Hadrian once. I'm not saying he's dull per se, but the researching process for that paper was certainly quite dull. Number 10. Free men. Gladiators weren't always forced to fight. Some of them actually chose that life. For some, it was about proving themselves in combat, for others it was about money, and for some others still, it was the only life they'd ever really known. I personally think it's wild that you'd offer to put your life on the line for some entertainment, but at the same time, that was the entertainment they had back then, and a life in ancient Rome, especially if you were already someone who'd lived a hard life as a soldier prior, was filled with all kinds of dangers anyways, so I guess I can see how some would actually feel inclined to fight by choice. On the other hand, while not all gladiators later on were owned and held prisoner, forced to fight, there were some who turned to it as a last resort, being desperately in need of money. And even though they were technically free men signing up, I would hardly consider them people who made the choice to be a gladiator. Instead of, being forced by someone who owned them to do so, they were instead forced by circumstance, so they didn't really choose it, they more just had to do it. It was the only option they had available at that time. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Bumblebee, be sure to click that subscribe button so you don't miss out when we talk about any other cool, weird history stuff. Number 9. The power of celebrity. When it comes to gladiators, which initially was a job reserved for those who were bound or who were criminals, so it was less of a job and more a thing you were forced to do, you might be wondering how it came to be that people ended up choosing such a profession. I mean, after all, this started off as something that you were forced to do, and then later on, people were just choosing to sign up voluntarily? Well, I can answer that question. It just so happened that as time went on, gladiators became kind of the celebrities of the day. No matter what their class or social standing, or even their history prior to them becoming gladiators, gladiators who did well in the arena actually were cheered on and even celebrated by the people of Rome. Because of this, there were those who were inclined to volunteer to fight in the arena and prove themselves because they basically wanted to become the next greatest gladiator. Many were compelled to join up because, like so many on the planet today, they were basically chasing a sense of fame and importance. And if you could win, being a gladiator could be seen as a violent and dirty but perhaps quick path towards attaining both. Kind of like what people do now, I feel on social media, like us on YouTube, you know what I mean? It's well, it'd be kind of cool to be known by people. I mean, that's not why I necessarily make content, I do it for entertainment. So I wonder if it's probably also gladiators that were just I just want to entertain people, man. It'll be fun. Yeah, I might die, but it'll be such a great time. That's so crazy to me. At least when I entertain people, I never have to fear being stabbed through the neck or something like that terrible happening to me. At least I hope not. Chris, you gonna stab me through the neck back there?
I don't think so.
No? Sweet. Safe. Number 8. The origins of the games. Initially, gladiatorial games started as less games and actually more funeral rituals. Some Roman historians suggested that the idea for having ritual combat as part of someone's funeral actually came from the Etruscans originally, but were adopted by Rome, fitting in well with their idea that blood could be used to basically purify one's soul. Honestly, the Romans apparently took a lot of Etruscan concepts and ideas and rituals and adopted them, so that makes sense to me. Oddly enough, that would also make a gladiatorial combat somewhat of an improvement to what they actually may have been doing before that, which may have just been straight up sacrificing folks to get that blood that they found to be so soul cleansing. Initially, the funeral gladiatorial games would primarily have people forcibly bound in servitude participate, or criminals as their participants. So yeah, it didn't, like I said on point 10 there were free people that signed up, but it didn't start out that way. It became that way over time. Number 7. Julius Caesar. While Julius Caesar might have been a person who many Romans respected and held in high regards, to some others he may have been the greatest villain of their life. And no, I'm not talking about Cassius or Brutus here or any of the others who conspired to depose and kill him behind closed doors near the end of his reign before the Ides of March. I'm talking about gladiators. And if you thought this point was called Julius Caesar because it's going to talk about him being a gladiator, no, that's not what I'm talking about. Julius Caesar, you see, was a pretty big fan and supporter of gladiatorial funeral games, taking them honestly to another level. When confronted with the death of both his father and later on his daughter, Caesar mourned their loss by putting on massive spectacles, hosting games in their honor that involved hundreds of gladiators. So not only did his father and daughter die, but so did tons of others as well in their name. Number 6. State-funded. Funerals may have been where the history of the game started, but within a few centuries they went from small-scale ritual combat to massive state-funded events. By 1 BCE, gladiatorial games had become so popular that they were no longer only put on when someone died, but instead were considered part of the institution and daily life of Rome. The state would actually pay to host the games for their citizens to then come to, making them akin to kind of an Olympic sporting event where the host often, pays much of the costs. Or like if your local favorite professional sports league was kind of like funded by your country or your state or your province, instead of going to a basketball game in ancient Rome, you would go to the Colosseum and you'd watch people potentially fight each other to the death. I can't even imagine what seeing something like that would do to people. Imagine growing up as a kid and like that was your big day out with your family in lieu of going to a ball game. Whoa. I mean, I guess we go to watch hockey a lot in Canada, so that can get pretty violent, but I don't know if it's on like gladiatorial combat levels. Number 5. Only a flesh wound. While gladiators did die in combat, it wasn't the only way combat would end. In fact, it was estimated that only somewhere between 1 in 5 or 1 in 10 combats actually ended with the death of a participant. Gladiators were not cheap to house, and they actually took time to train. So the people that promoted and in some cases owned them actually preferred to keep them alive for as long as they could because it was expensive. As long as they put on a good show, most combatants were actually allowed to leave the arena after a match was considered finished, and some matches even ended prematurely without a victor or any really grave injury if the participants were too evenly matched, causing the fight to go on too long, thereby becoming, somewhat dull for the audience members to watch. So they would just be like, you know what? I think we're just gonna end that match. It's a good match, everyone. Get out of here. Go rest. Number 4. Weight and size. Earlier, I compared the gladiatorial games of the day to that of a sporting event like basketball or baseball or even hockey. But in reality, some of the ways in which the games were organized and run actually makes gladiatorial combat similar to boxing or wrestling or mixed martial arts matches. While you've likely seen films and TV paint gladiatorial combat as sometimes extremely unfairly matched, with it being clear that the struggle of someone fighting for their life is actually the purpose of the entertainment. In reality, combatants were often matched up using their weight and their size to make the fight more fair. So they weren't really thinking of like, let's make this guy fight like 5 lions, that'll be crazy. They're more like, let's make sure this guy has an evenly matched guy so they can have a good fair fight. Number 3. Referees. When it came time for gladiators to fight, if death didn't always occur, then how would you tell that the match was done? Well, actually, it wasn't as simple as having participants fight until only one was left standing. In fact, there were actually rules and restrictions that gladiators had to follow during their match. And to oversee all of this was a referee. Yeah, when we picture a gladiatorial scene in our minds, we don't usually think of like a person in black and white stripes out on the field with the combatants, do we? And yet that was totally a thing that happened. Well, I don't know if they wore black and white stripes, probably not, but maybe there was some element of that. Maybe that's where that came from, who knows. The referee is believed to have been responsible for making sure rules were being followed and likely even called matches, deciding when they were done instead of it being a basic, fight to the death. They just be like, that was a good enough match, I think you win and that's it, bye. Go back and rest up. Number 2. Short lifespan. If based on the rest of this list, this is all starting to sound not quite as bad as you'd imagine and you're like, messed up? This doesn't sound so messed up. Well, first of all, it is messed up in the sense that you think you know, but you don't really know, which I think is pretty messed up. Why do we portray these things to be, well, entertainment I guess, but they weren't that crazy. Well, in a way, based on what we know from the movies, some of the honor involved in gladiatorial combat might seem weirdly messed up in terms of, like I said, your previous perception. This point point is honestly just straight messed up based on our experience living in the modern world. While gladiators weren't as likely to die in combat as you may have thought, they still didn't have easy lives. Not even close. Also, like I said, when we started out, it was basically like, well, we could sacrifice people or we could have them fight to the death and have people that have no choice but to do it. Gladiators would frequently be wounded in battle, and all those wounds would add up. Gladiators had notoriously short lives as such, with many of them only living at most to their mid-20s, a relatively short lifespan when you compare it to the average lifespan we see today in North America, and even honestly around the world. Today, in North America, the average lifespan is actually between 77 and 81 years old, so imagine only living to your mid-20s. If I were a gladiator, I'd be gone. That's it. Number 1, thumbs down. This gesture. You know this? You might think you know what this gesture means in gladiatorial combat based on the films covering this topic, but do you really know? While films portray the Roman emperor as the one who had final say on whether or not a gladiator lives or dies, with them giving a thumbs down to signify death, based on what we know from historical records, this likely isn't the gesture they would have used, and actually, the emperor likely wouldn't have even been the person you'd look to for that judgment. Now, it's true that the emperor would ultimately have the final say. After all, they were the emperor, considered, supreme ruler of all of the Roman Empire. But oftentimes, both they and those involved in organizing and running the games would actually encourage the audience to participate in this judgment. Very interactive, the gladiatorial games. So it would be up to the audience to decide whether or not the gladiator lived or died. And it's actually believed that a thumbs down was one of the gestures used to vote for the gladiator receiving mercy. Well, a thumbs up actually condemned them to death. So you don't want to see this if you're a gladiator, you actually want to see that. Accompanied, of course, by the masses also verbally cheering out their ruling. So it wouldn't just be like this, like, yeah, die. You would also be like, yeah, kill that guy. He's out. I don't know why I'm so happy when I'm saying that. I think it's because I'm giving a thumbs up. Inherently, in this day and age, it makes me want to smile. You'd be like, yeah, kill him. That seems counterintuitive. Alright, that's about it. I will see you in the future.